Today we are going to go over how to turn a 2D shape into a 3D form. We're going to work on a sphere. So first thing that I'm going to do is to draw excuse me, I'm trying to autofocus that, to draw a circle. Not perfect, but good enough. You're going to want to keep it light. We're just going to keep building over this. Make sure when you're drawing, you are in a good, comfortable seated position. Your shoulders are back, elbows pointing down, maybe out, kind of loose. Should have like a little bit of a loose movement. So next what we're going to do, so this is just flat. We can see it's flat. It doesn't have any form to it. We're going to make a long axis, or another term of that is a center line. So let's have our sphere going back in space. So it'll be going that way. Right now, this is just a really rough shape. The best way that I have found to make a sphere is to make a little dot. That's where that entrance will be of this line. And then it has to go out somewhere. So let's say it goes out here. If we think, this would be all hidden. This is hidden too. And then it would be going out here, like that. So we want to think about the same circle movement to follow throughout this structure. And let me demonstrate. So I want this to be the center of these mini circles. And they'll be a little oblong. They're not going to be perfect because we have to think about now perspective. So maybe I do another dot here, keeping the circles around and getting a little wider, right? I'm gonna curve. I'm just gonna go slow and steady. I'm just working to find the form. And you'll notice that these rings get a little farther apart, right? It's turning. We have to think about it going back. So maybe we can do another dot just as a good reminder. Okay, I believe those are latitude lines. I will have to double check. Next, we're going to do longitude, and we're thinking about the same point, our last point here. If you can imagine this, just wrapping around this shape, around the sphere. I think the best thing to do is just go slow and be patient with it and find the joy in building out a 3D form. So then this, if you could imagine, it's wrapping. It would wrap down here. It looks a little silly like that. Additionally, as we move closer to this center line, this long axis on either side, this point, or this side right here, is actually pretty straight. all lines that lead to this, and then on the other side, and even here. So if this was split into quadrants, all these straight, these progressively bend more. So these, as it gets closer to the center line, are not going to be as much of an arc. You can see what I mean there. It's not as much, it's not as dramatic as this sort of gesture. So as it goes to this line, it would just become a little straighter. Okay, that looks pretty good. Maybe a little flat over here. Maybe this could move over here a little bit or something of that manner. But I'm gonna let it be. So that looks like a sphere. It almost looks like a little cage is on it. But this is important because when we start doing hatching, cross hatching, contour, cross hatching, cross contour, any other shading technique or technique that adds value, you want to pay attention to the direction of these lines. It's going to be, coming out this way. So we're going to eventually look for a core shadow, highlights, things of that sort, but we're going to get into that in a little later. This is just very preliminary drawing. Okay, so you have been practicing circles, which was the intention of that exercise, right? It's in a square box, any size square box, right? We're working with variation. And then you go in between, or whatever the length is, just half it. And you're looking to meet these marks. So maybe going slow at first, just lightly, not even touching the page is a good way to go. You'll notice that you're probably really tight and are leaning with your body. Don't do that. I was just doing it, so you might be as well. You can go really slow, or you can make gestural circles. And kind of a way to, my pencil is short. I can't find my pencil extender, which they do make. You start first by just making that gesture and then laying the pencil down. Just starting to, you're like pressing your finger into it a little bit. You're holding it like this and you're just, on one plane, we're going to get into planes here, one plane of the pencil, you're slightly pushing down that way. Maybe starting to tilt is another way. I kind of start panicking because I'll do a really good circle and then I'll panic because I think I've gotten it and then I will swoop in. So just notice that about your own way of making. I don't know if that happens to other people, but it happens to me. Okay, so that's sort of a gestural, not sort of, it is a gestural circle, more loose. So you can do whatever you like with that. We're going to make a large one and I'm going to demonstrate how to turn form. So you can get something to trace if you like. A good practice is to do a circle, do a gestural circle and not rely always on these devices, but for brevity's sake, it's totally fine. People have used compasses forever, so you can get help. Use all of the tools you can to help you. All right, so I have a circle here. It's a shape. The circle is a shape. And these forms our 3D. So it would become a sphere. A square becomes a cube. A rectangle becomes, if you marry it with like a semicircle, I guess, it becomes a cylinder. You'll see a lot of cylinders, which is why we were practicing making ellipses or ovals, whatever you'd like to call them. Right, and then a triangle would become a pyramid or a cone. So we'll see that, you've already seen it in the PowerPoint because you're watching these videos after you watch the lecture. Okay, so we need to, if we want to turn this 2D shape into a 3D form, 3D is reliant on a light source. So that's what makes form, is a light source. Let's put our light source. This is how you delineate where a light source is a circle and a line or an arrow pointing at it. So the light source, our highlight, it's kind of a weird spot. Let's bring this, it's just a harder, it's not doable, but we want to think about our light source, you know, maybe my half of my sphere in sort of this traditional seeing way is up here. Okay. Ugh. Okay. So, let's see, the highlight, if our axes, we need to find a long axis, we need to find a center line is what needs to happen. Because all form is also reliant on this center line. And this is where the form, this is where modeling happens. Modeling is adding value and turning form. But that's where this occurs. So even if you have a ball in front of you or something, if you can find a, you know, a white matte ball is great, but maybe an ornament. It's Christmas time. Look for an ornament around. Maybe that's like not super shiny, or I guess it could be shiny. We would talk about reflected light there, but I digress. So this is going to be sort of the beginning of our center line. So we can just do a little circle there. And then all of these come out, my center line's maybe a little high. It is probably more like that. So think about this going through the object or an orange or whatever. It has to come in somewhere. So this line would be on the outside. And then this is the outside of the object, so we're not going to see any of that. And it's like an arrow piercing through. And then it has to have an exit, which is maybe yay, but we don't see that. The sphere is the hardest to draw. I find it to be the hardest to draw. It takes me the longest, and it's everywhere, so buck up. So highlight here, turning form here. We're going to first start to circle this axis. So this is all on, this is hard to explain. You essentially want to draw circles around this center line, but they need to be even. So, or even sort of ovals. So let's say I put a mark here. I want this to be even all around. Maybe taking a compass, or you're doing them progressively larger. So coming out here and then having equal distance. Okay. Okay, so we need to put a center line. All right, so, All right. Okay, so now that we have had this drawn, this circle, we need to source is over here. It's going to be falling, probably the highlight is going to be here. Okay, it's kind of looking like a sphere a little bit. Next, we have to be concerned with this cross contour, cross hatching. So if our light source is here and we're working on building up our line, this will eventually get erased. We're right now just feeling out the shape of that sphere, seeing where any sides, and we'll address these sides when we do. All right, so highlight, we can see that where that light source is coming from. There's even this little circle with an arrow where I've pointed that out for you. We're going to then be mostly concerned with this core shadow. It's your core shadow is where that form turns. So if we imagine it's in still circle form or sphere form, we have this apex, right? And maybe the apex is they're kind of just very close to where I had that axis line. So my core shadow, we'll need to go in here and work that out, is the darkest or like the deepest value on for a form shadow. A form shadow is a shadow that is on the form. There is also cast shadow, which you see, and a cast shadow is a shadow that is cast. I mean, it takes its shadow and its color. This is sort of complicated, but it you get into that in painting. It doesn't matter so much in drawing because we're only working with graphite pencil for the most part, unless you work with colored pencil. But that's a lesson for another day. So it takes the color of the object it's cast upon. Long story short there. So with this will be where our darkest form shadow is. So starting here when we're doing form is important because you can just keep building up the graphite from there, you know. You don't want to start in your lightest area. That doesn't make sense. So start in the darkest and then you just keep building, 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 just like we did with that value scale. So I want to draw a little cone to show you that example too of where it would be. You can identify where the darkest, we walked through that in the lecture. But if this was light was coming here, our highlight would fall yay. And where this is turning, where the apex of that ellipse is going to be our core shadow. It's also called a bedbug line. Gross. And the terminator. In the, they have the terminator for some reason. It's all, you know, you'll get different terminology. They have the terminator almost as the half core shadow on this. Anyways, so that's that with a cylinder. And then these lines all go down. We'll get into that later. Okay, so if you're still with me, we want to think about now how these longitude, latitude lines. So I think it's easiest if you just kind of draw some in. As you get to this long axis line, the straight line here, these lines, these longitude, latitude lines are also become a little straighter. Actually, they don't meet. They're not going to meet here. They'll meet here around, but we don't see that because it's in the back. And then these, you know, if we're going out here, these become straighter. Or not straighter, more curved. They fall off. Okay, so if we start building this out with cross contour, you know, I'm in a little deep here, but I'm just going to erase this and show you, you know, or start blending it a different way. So instead of starting all the way over again, we've gotten this far. You're gonna just be following that form. And if I know that my terminator line is my bedbug line is right about here, now I can go through, and if we think about this axes here, how light will, it can flatten out and start going the other way. And instead of going all the way down, I'm starting my cross contour, cross hatching with at that bedbug line. And just going slow. We're building now the halftone. not only does the value or shadow change, there's that, but there's also going to be this sort of mid-value shadow here where this turns. Like you can see that there's going to be another little apex there, like if this is our highlight. Now I can see a little bit better, right? So I was doing some diagrammatic or those schematic lines when I was planning out the sphere, those latitude longitude lines. So those are considered schematic or diagrammatic. So just feeling it out. Some stay, some go. So here's our highlight. We can come back through and shade that, but I'm okay with sort of how it's looking now. You saw the build up to this point. There will also be a shadow or sort of a mid-value shadow where this turns to. That might be it'll be a little darker. It kind of follows this turn. You'll see I'm using the side of my pencil. It's giving me a little bit broader area for me to lay down value. Still drawing back to, now it's gone, but still drawing back to that entrance point, that highlight. And then, just sort of rotating that sphere in space. So thinking about this line going around. Put a little bit of pressure down, lift up. And working on too, applying pressure. So lightly starting and then applying a little bit more pressure in the darkest areas and lifting up. Little lighter, darker, lift up. That's what we talk about when we talk about line weight. Okay, I'm gonna stop. You have to stop somewhere because you could just make everything a certain way or you could keep playing with it. So this is cross contour. Also, if you don't want graphite, I mean, I don't really have that much graphite on me now, but you see where it's smudging? You can just take another piece of paper and you can either put it on top, or if you have waxed paper at home or parchment paper would work fine too if you are in the business of baking cookies. That'll work. So you just cut out a little piece and set it on the piece of paper and you won't get it all smudgy like I've got it. Now that our form shadow is complete, we need to do the addition of a cast shadow to complete our form. So it will just depend where your light source is and what direction your shadow will go from there. This, if we just kind of keep continuing that through, just as a little understanding and reminder that shadows will be projected that way. It's much easier if you have something in front of you as a reference. But I'm going to just do a little what if, and we'll see what happens. And we'll just build this up. This shadow that we're building up right here is an accent shadow. We get into the full cast shadow here, and then what is called the penumbra will be around the farthest border, and it's just, maybe a level or two of value lighter than the cast shadow. The accent is the shadow or the part where the object meets the ground or whatever it's resting on. Going through and modifying this area. Okay, so that looks good enough. It might be a little larger, but the intention is that you're seeing there's a difference between this edge and this edge. There should be a, maybe not completely noticeable, but when you start looking at shadows around you, you'll notice that that penumbra is there. So just demonstrating there's a little bit of a difference. This is an exercise that will walk you through how to depict various shading techniques. First, you're going to start by making 6 circles on the page. I'm using a Westby's Parmesan lid. Our first technique is going to be hatching. Hatching is the technique of drawing parallel lines next to one another. I chose to use vertical. My light source is coming from my top upper right. I did not delineate that in this or demarcate that in this video. So I'm gradually building up the core shadow. Next, I'm going to be doing cross-hatching. Cross-hatching, just like we have done in the value scale, is where we're placing not only parallel lines next to one another, but then diagonal and horizontal to build volume through hatching. You'll see that I have forgotten to add my shadows, so I'm going back and doing that. Whatever technique that you've used to delineate value, excuse me, in your form, you will also use with your shadow. So here I'm using hatching, and in the cross-hatching example, I'm going to also use cross-hatching when depicting a shadow. Our next example is cross contour, where I'm building the form through these schematic or diagrammatic lines first, and then going through and adding more for depth. This one's really fun. It's scribbling. So you're working in scribbles. Make sure to go back and forth, maybe some figure eights, working in multiple directions to build up the darkest core shadow. You'll see that I forgot to do the cross contour shadow there. Shadows are an easy thing to forget. In the fifth circle, we're going to be doing stippling. Another term is pointillism in painting, where you're just holding the pencil perpendicular to the surface and making lots of dots. I kind of push my pencil a little bit. And in the last technique, I will be doing circulism. Circulism is Just how it sounds, it's made with tiny, light circles. This is a really soft technique that will help to add a lot of gradation. You'll see circulism used in photorealist drawings.